Yeah.
Whatever. Everything around here. I just need to, connect to the TV. Says there's something. I was at my doctor for something else. I said, can you do it? Hello, friends who are joining us on Zoom. Hello, hello, hello. I appreciate you being with us today, asking for your patience for just a moment as we are having some technical issues here in the Beit Midrash, but we'll be up and running in just a minute or two. Oh, Rabbi, impressive. David, can you hear me? Touch your nose.
Yeah, we hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Put you on the owl. Good morning, Robin. Good morning, Judith. Jack is somewhere. Okay. Let's do this.
Those are strange people online. The 5 people there.
They got his ear down, didn't they?
Yes, Daphne did. She's the artist in the family.
The little one?
No, the middle one.
The little.
Middle one. She's the artiste.
She's so.
All right. So for those of you who are joining us virtually, I'm just going to ask for a little bit of cooperation from you. Don't need to do much, but just know that the folks in the room here can't see you, but I can. We had some issues with the computer in the room, so you're on my lap. You don't even know any of this, right? I can see you. If you got something to say, do me a favor. Don't just wait for me to see you going like this. Actually, like turn on your microphone and say something. Are we cool? All right. Well, good morning, everybody. How are we doing? I'm going to pass these text sheets around to everybody. I think we have enough of the shorts. There were more on the printer, but I ran away. I don't know what I'm doing here. No, I do know what I'm doing here. Wait, Bobby's here. Jack is there. Jack, your beloved, is right next to me. Say hello. Bobby Jack says hi. So I actually love the fact, A, that we hired Lila, and she's amazing. And B, that we are getting into an opportunity to study Parsha Hashavua in a meaningful way. You all know how much I love our Shabbat morning Torah study. I will be with us again tomorrow, and we will finally finish that conversation about the shofar. But the idea to delve deeply into the Parsha is also exciting. And when I was rabbinic students, I used to do this once a month when I would travel down to my student pulpit, which was in, thank you, Devon, in Temecula, California, which is about an hour and a half south of LA, close to San Diego. And what I would do is I would pick a very interesting verse or two or something in the Torah portion, and then we would delve into that wellspring of insight from Jewish history to try to figure out what it means. And so it's kind of what Lila suggested this was supposed to be about, and if it's not, we'll talk noogies. That's what we're doing. So for those of you in the room, you have the texts on the slides in front of you. For those of you on Zoom, I will put the slide deck up on the share just after we together say the bracha for study of Torah. So please say with me. Pray Torah. We praise you, Adonai, our God, of the universe, who makes us holy by giving us commandments and commands us to engage in the study of Torah. All right. let's get the share up on the screen so that those of you at home can see the slide deck and you will see verses from Deuteronomy. I did not include the Hebrew text this time. It really was not particularly, I mean, it's always good, but there wasn't anything about the uniqueness of the Hebrew text that called for it this time, and I saved some space on the paper and that kind of stuff. All right, so we are in the book of Deuteronomy. It's a new book, right? We started Sefer Devarim with Parsha Devarim, these things that happen, and we know that it's essentially a reiteration of all the things that have happened, right? Anyone know what the word Deuteronomy means in Greek? Or what the Greek etymology of it is?
Study of God.
It does not mean study of God. It means second telling or second study,
Oh,
right? Things that happen, but the historical setting is that they are about to enter into the promised land. And Moses is using an opportunity to remind everybody of the commitments that were set before them earlier off in the story, knowing that he is not going to be going with them on their journey into the promised land. And so in English, with this Greek rooted word Deuteronomy, second telling, that is where we are. And all through it, is a mix of new stuff and old stuff. We know, for example, that next week we're going to read chapter 6 of Deuteronomy. Anyone know what 6 words come from chapter 6 of Deuteronomy? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, right? And then the following verses, 5 through 9, are the Ve'ahavta. Okay, that's new, but also there's a new telling of the 10 Commandments and some other things as well. But it's this last long reminder of all of the things with some new stuff sprinkled in or some new nuances sprinkled in. All right. So in this first chapter, that we have this little episode. God says to Moses, pick from each of your tribes candidates who are wise, discerning, and experienced, and I will appoint them as your heads. You supposed to do is good. So I took your tribal leaders, wise and appointed them heads over you, chiefs of thousands, chiefs of hundreds, chiefs of 50s, chiefs of 10s, and officials for your tribes. I charged your magistrates at that time as follows. Hear out your fellow Israelites and decide justly between one party and another, be it a fellow Israelite or a stranger. You shall not be partial in judgment. Hear out low and high alike. Fear neither party, for judgment is God's. And any matter that is too difficult for you, you shall bring to me, and I will hear it. Okay. What? The second thing you said?
Courts.
Courts, right? Some kind of judicial system. Excellent. I'm going to push the first part to say hierarchy of what? Yes, it's a hierarchy. What do we think this hierarchy is there to do?
Lead.
Lead. Egypt. Who was empowered to make decisions on behalf of the people?
Moses.
Moses. Who else? Nobody. Was that effective?
First time.
No, it wasn't. Only for the morning, right? It was. So what was it? What was the advice that Moses got? To create a hierarchy, to delegate to chiefs of thousands and hundreds and 50s and 10s and tribes, and to make this vertical pyramidic structure of hierarchy, to delegate decision-making authority for the more simpler questions to lower officials. Anyone recall whose idea that was? It was Jethro, his father-in-law, the first example of a father-in-law who had good advice. That can go one of two ways. I am blessed. All right. So this is a little bit of a reiteration of that, but also a reframing. So in addition to this talking about the need to have these magistrates, to have these officials in place, we also get some guidance as to how they are supposed to behave. Sylvia.
My question is, before that time,
Mm-hmm.
was there never any kind of organized structure such as this? I mean, the world was just, how was it managed?
Well, what world are you imagining when you say before this time?
Well, before the Judaic principle.
Okay. So, no, listen, we know that there were other legal systems in other countries and other places. This is not universal. This doesn't apply to all of humanity. This applies to the Israelite nation. They did not have a system, right? They went from, what was the system before? The system before was they were subject to Pharaoh, right? They were living in Egypt. They were subject to Pharaoh. And so whatever Pharaoh decided, that was the way things were. They come out of slavery into freedom. And initially, it was Moses making all of the decisions. And that very early on became impractical, right? Before we went into Egypt, we weren't that big, right? It was, Bobby, what'd you say? No, before Egypt.
Oh, before you.
Before Egypt, who was in charge? Dad, right? Jacob was in charge of his sons. Before him, it was Isaac. Before him was Abraham, and that was it. So you just had, it was a single household, a single family, and the head of the household made all the decisions. But what happened over the 400 years, while we were under Pharaoh's rule, so we abided by Pharaoh's laws, we expanded to, hundreds of thousands. And so we needed an infrastructure.
So just one more question.
Yeah.
So, is it divine intervention for Moses, or how did Moses knew how to do this?
God, well,
Well,
Jethro told him to, and God told him what?
Yes.
It was
Yes.
divine intervention.
Well, I would call that prophecy, but those being the same thing, right? God told Moses, this is what you're gonna do. God is saying, I'm gonna help you, I'm gonna show you, I'm gonna elect who those heads of households are gonna be, right? And it says, if we go back in earlier books, God says, all right, this is gonna be the chief of the tribe of Reuben, and this is gonna be the chief of the tribe of Simeon. Like, God tells them who they're gonna be. All right, let's move forward. So we're gonna talk about two things, but mostly two things. I'm going to focus on this wise, discerning, and experienced. What are the qualifications to be a leader? And then what are the expectations of their behavior that we see in the second part? I've chosen to look at Midrashim and early commentary and the Rishonim, and later and some medieval texts that help elucidate what this means. And a lot of it has interesting applicability for us in our lives. All right. Devarim Rabbah, Midrash Rabbah, right? Midrash Rabbah comes to us, and I love to talk about this. Midrash Rabbah was compiled in the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries in the land of Israel, but it is among those texts that traditionally are believed to have been revealed by God to Moses at Sinai. It is part of the oral Torah. I just told you two things that do not line up factually. Either it was given by God to Moses at Sinai, and it was written in the 7th century CE. You have to hold both those ideas in mind at the same time. One is a belief and one is a fact. Those are different. Rabbi Laila ben Abba said, the protocol for a trial is as follows. The plaintiff, the one making the claim, states his claim. The defendant responds, and the judge renders a decision. That seems pretty straightforward, right? Okay. Rabbi Sima said, the judge must orally review their claims. From whom can you learn this? Well, from Solomon. Who's Solomon? Shlomo HaMelech, right? King Solomon has stated, the king said, this one says, this is my living son, and your son is the dead one. And that one says, no, rather, your son is dead, is the dead one, and mine is the live one. Anyone know this story?
No.
Yes, you do. This is King Solomon and the baby. Well, so this is, both of them are claiming, no. Yes, we both had sons, but this one is mine and yours is dead. And the other one says, no, this one is mine and yours is dead. Right? This is what happens in the story. I've been learning this because this is the Haftarah that Claire's gonna be reading in her bat mitzvah in a few months. Didn't know until recently, I never read that closely, that the women involved in the story are women of the night.
Oh, really?
Really? Thank you. Does anyone not have a text? Okay, thank you, Karen. They were women of the night, and they were fighting over this child, right? But the point is, or I'm going to ask you, how does Rabbi Sima conclude that the judge must orally review the claims from this text in the Book of Kings? What's the intellectual connection?
What do you mean by orally review them?
What does that mean?
Talk about it.
Talk about it, review it, reiterate it. Marshall, what are you going to say?
Also, when you say something out loud.
Yes.
Sometimes it becomes clear.
What he's saying is the judge has to, Rabbi Chia says, plaintiff speaks, defendant speaks, judge renders a verdict.
Judge has to be listening if things that are.
More than listening, Sima says, the judge has to repeat,
Yeah.
reiterate into court the things that he or she heard, mostly he, but I can say he or she heard from the claimants. Why? Because that's what Shlomo did. Solomon, in hearing from the two women, said back to them, the king said, this one says, and that one says, and from that we glean it's our practice for the judge to repeat the claims before rendering the decision. This is a matter of procedure. Procedurally, the judge has to restate the claims, perhaps to make sure that he got it right. And they give the claimants a chance to say, no, you misunderstood me.
Is it also implied that he say in a way where he's neutral, doesn't show preference?
We'll get there. This is one step at a time.
Okay.
One
Is he
step at a
allowed
time.
to write anything now?
I'm sure. Right? So, second bit of it, Rabbi Yehuda ben Rabbi Eli says, I heard that if a judge wishes to seat the litigants, he may seat them. Why is that prohibited? There may not be one sitting and the other standing. As Rabbi Yishmael said, if there was a judge and two people came for a judgment, one wealthy and one impoverished, he should say to the wealthy one, dress as he is dressed, or dress him as you are dressed. Right? We should go to great lengths to have no room for partiality between the litigants.
Mhm.
Either they both sit or they both stand. Either they're both dressed finely or they're both dressed in their active wear, work from home clothes, right? Or whatever it is. So that no one could say, by the way, we trust our judges. But you wouldn't want anyone to say of the judgment, if the judge happens to rule in favor of the wealthy party because he actually was on the right side of the law, that he did it because he was dressed more nicely. Try to remove any possibility of partiality.
That now, when I was sequestered for a jury duty like a year ago,
Mhm.
there was the murder defendant right there and he was in a fine suit, not in his jail outfit.
Right, exactly.
That's why they listen.
They always dress the man.
They dress the Muslim. That it's the defendant's job, the lawyer's job to get them dressed up. You shall not show preference, we read in the book of Deuteronomy. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachum, Rabbi Elazar said, if you, the judge, realize that the justice is in favor of one of the litigants, do not show him a favorable countenance. So the other litigant should say, from the outset, he smiled at the other guy because he made up his mind already. No, you got to keep an independent demeanor. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachum said, if the judge know that justice is not in his favor, show him a favorable countenance to say, so he shouldn't say, oh, you gave me a scowl from the beginning, I knew you had it out to get me. Rabbi Hanina said, one verse says, you shall judge fairly. Another says, you shall inquire, interrogate, and ask diligently. How can this be resolved? How can you act both with impartiality and with wisdom and insights? If you sense that the case is fraudulent, interrogate him. But if you sense that the case is being resolved truthfully, judge him fairly. This is a little nuanced, right? A lot of people bring fraudulent claims. Not that they're committing fraud, but they're trying to see how far they can push their version of the facts. I once sat on a jury, and I would sit here and I say that I think that the prosecutor did this. They brought forth a case that they thought might convince the jury of the guilt, but sitting in the jury, not even close. I might say that they were this example of, I needed to bring my sense of justice to say this had no business even being discussed, because it wasn't even close. On the other hand, the defendant did commit other crimes that we convicted him of, because that was also clear. Anyway,
But the judge also could have partiality.
the judge could have partiality, and we also know that in our judicial system, there's one burden to get into court, even as a prosecutor, and another for conviction. You only need probable cause to have the trial, but you need beyond a reasonable doubt for a conviction, right? And so there is that gray area, which is to say, oh yeah, in my mind, I can see the probable cause, but nowhere near beyond reasonable doubt. Okay. So be it. All right. We are gonna fast forward now in history about 400 years, and we're gonna land in France with the granddaddy of them all. Who is the granddaddy of biblical interpretation? Rashi, except not, yes, but not really. Because Rashi didn't actually come up with most of his interpretations. Most of his interpretations actually come out of things like the Midrashim. He didn't quite say that when he wrote it, but there are really good compendia that talk about, okay, where was this idea? Now listen, Rashi would take these two pieces from Divine Rabbah and write it in one sentence. He clarifies it in a lot of ways, but just knowing that Rashi didn't pull this out of nowhere. He pulled it out of the oral tradition. All right, Rashi. I took men, wise and known, but understanding men I could not find. This too is one of the 7 qualifications which Jethro mentioned in Moses, but was found in only 3 men. Righteous men, wise and known. Rashi is reminding us, if you forgot, that one of the things that Jethro told Moses was to find understanding men. And it was not so easy to. And he's wondering, why is it that in Exodus, Moses is told to get men who are wise and known and understanding, but in Deuteronomy, in this second telling, the word understanding doesn't appear, and the answer is they couldn't find any. So they struck from the record that qualification, right? Not everything in Bible lines up exactly. Bobby.
Wise imply understanding.
So this is where it works better in Hebrew, but there is chokhmah and there is bina, right? And those are 2 different types. Chokhmah is usually considered to be wisdom, and bina is meant to be considered understanding. There's also knowledge, da'at, and a few other words as well. Hold on to that, because we're going to have some fun wordplay in a little bit. Anyone ever heard the words chokhmah and da'at and bina put together anywhere? Hold on, you're going to love this. All right, 200 years later after Rashi, also in France, we have Rabbi Chizikia ben Manoach, the Chizkuni, who responds to Rashi. Rashi points out that apparently Moses had not found men possessed of bina, understanding, insight. One of the criteria that Jethro had told to look for in men appointed to judge others. He had only found men that he could be called righteous, right? Tzadikim, wise, chacham, and knowledgeable, imda'at. If you were to ask what happened to the other qualifications stipulated by Yitro as a precondition, as we see in Exodus 18, the fact that these 7 qualifications do not appear consecutively, but only 4 of them appear in the verse quoted, is a hint, as Rashi suggested, that not all the virtues could be found in one man, and therefore we should have to settle for less. Solomon, in Mishlei 31, anyone know what Mishlei 31 is? Eshet chayil mi yimsa, a woman of valor. This is aspirational. And sometimes we don't get it. Many.
This is hypothetical, but wouldn't it make sense, since it's a group, consortium, to have people that have a strength in wisdom
Mm-hmm.
and people have a strength in understanding,
Uh-huh.
so that they're Knowing
Yeah.
that there is not one.
That's the next bit of the conversation. But ideally,
Okay.
if we were to take Jethro's advice from Exodus 18, we would wanna have people that had all of them.
Okay.
Hard to find. Hard to find. Nobody's perfect. Rabbi Barachia, in the name of Rabbi Chama, son of Rabbi Hanina, is quoted in Deuteronomy Rabbah, right? We're seeing again the quotations from the earlier Midrashim, having said, judges must possess 7 virtues: wisdom, insight, and knowledge, plus the 4 listed in Exodus 18. The reason that does not appear together is to teach a lesson that 7 virtues are meant to be as in the best case scenario. If it is impossible to find people with all of these virtues, naturally we have to settle for less. Just as we never had a king that possessed all of the virtues listed in Deuteronomy 17. You can want what you want, but you get what you get and you don't get upset. This is the wisdom I'm trying to teach my daughter this morning as she is sitting in a bus outside of Atlanta Airport, having just learned that her flight was canceled and she's gonna have to wait an hour and a half to get on another bus to drive her to Orlando to get picked up and to be driven home from there. And she was like, how am I gonna do this? How can this be? It's gonna be. You get what you get and you don't get upset. You're gonna get home tonight. It's not the way we thought it was gonna be. It's not gonna be as straightforward, but you're gonna get home tonight. And what virtue do we have to ask her to find right now? Patience.
That's right, the trust.
She's gonna sit there and tush all afternoon, strength, whatever, we'll see. Sure.
I would be on.
The can, yeah. And she's got food, and she's got a roof over her head, and for better or for worse, her sister next to her. Mostly for worse, I think. All right. Rabbi Laila, right? We were learning him, by the way, for those of us who were together last Saturday at Torah study, we were learning a lot about Rabbi Bachia, right? 14th century Spanish thinker. Moses does not mention Nivoni, men of insight. One of the criteria, he's pointing out the same thing. This idea of Bina, of insight, of understanding, it wasn't there. And why? Again, we see over and over again, why did it get left off? Because there was none of them.
Why did they just leave it off because there was none of them? Why didn't they put
All right.
something in?
Clarice, you asked a good question. The rabbis they're thinking about this in the opposite order. They are noticing that the divinely given text of the book of Exodus and the divinely given text in the book of Deuteronomy have a mismatch. So they have to reason what was the cause. How could it be that there was a difference? And they have to come up with some practical explanation as to why it was left off. And the resonant answer is that from the time Jethro gave that advice in the book of Exodus to the 38 some odd years later that they got to the land, to the book of Deuteronomy, they realized they didn't have anybody who had all this. That's the rabbinic answer. What's the real answer? For those of us moderns, the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Exodus were written by different people at different time, and it's just, they didn't use that adjective that time. That's the biblical scholar's answer, right? It's a different manuscript. Words change. Maybe.
I think.
Less fun.
Because men, I guess if you're talking with men, or maybe men who had some influence, but from their women, all had a unique perspective, given their circumstances in life and their backgrounds.
Yeah.
So everything isn't perfect.
Right. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's perfect. Which is, I think, a lesson that we can take from this episode in our life, which is to say, when you're looking for someone for something, you're entitled to have as many criteria as you want. But just like Moses had to, be prepared to sacrifice one or two. Otherwise, you'll be looking a long time. Okay. We're going to move forward now into the 18th century, late 18th century. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi wrote a collection called the Tanya. Anyone heard of the Tanya?
Yeah.
What's the Tanya?
It's Hasidic.
It's not just it is Hasidic, but it's even more specific than that. The Tanya is the core text of Chabad. It is the core text of Chabad, written by Shneur Zalman, the founder of Chabad Hasidism, and it presents the philosophy of the movement. All right. Now, the source and roots of all the attributes are of the Chabad. That is, Chokhmah, wisdom, the source of the intellect, which apprehends the Lord and in God's wisdom, his greatness, and God's holy attributes, wherewith God conducts and animates all the upper and lower worlds. Bina is the contemplation on this apprehension and the length, width, and depth of his understanding. Bina is the thing that the rabbis have been saying have been missing from the generations. There was Chokhmah, there was other stuff, but there was no Bina. To understand one matter out of another, and to beget from this apprehension its offsprings, like the attributes of love and awe, and other attributes born of the divine soul, which cogitates and contemplates the greatness of God, and how God's greatness is unfathomable. There is an aspect of the greatness of God to the divine soul's contemplation, on which fear and dread, this is what we call yirat hata'a, an aspect of malchut, of God's kingship, God's sovereignty. Chabad, we know all of Chabad. The word Chabad is an acronym for 3 different types of intellectual undertaking. Chokhmah, wisdom, Bina, understanding, and Da'at, knowledge. Chokhmah, Bina, Da'at is an acronym for Chabad. That's where they get the name from. And it's the reason why I show this is because this talks about how important Bina is in this moment when we're talking about a moment in Jewish history when we could not find men that had Bina. Or the men who had Bina didn't have Chokhmah and Da'at and the other things. So be it.
Da'at is knowledge.
Da'at is knowledge.
What's the difference between wisdom and knowledge?
It's a good question. You can write a whole book about it.
I agree.
Lauren, go ahead. And then we'll take a minute. There's no answer. There's a good answer. Lauren, what do you got?
Wisdom has something to do with more of a collective presence.
Okay.
Knowledge is maybe something that you're learning and it's a little more tangible, like you're learning a fact.
Yeah. Marshall, were you
I
to
was
say?
gonna say.
Yeah. I would say that Da'at is more factual, right? I'm gonna use a poor example and forgive me, right? There are people who are baseball fans. And they can rattle off all the things that have happened in baseball history. This number, this. That is Da'at, that is knowledge about what happened. When I was a kid growing up playing ball, one of the things that my coaches instilled upon me was that no matter what position you're playing, as the pitcher is about to pitch the ball, I should be asking myself, what am I going to do if the ball is hit to me? Right? Because depending on the circumstance, how many runners are on base, what bases they're on, how many outs there are, what's the score, all those things, and depending on how the ball is hit to me, what I'm going to do with it when it comes is going to depend a lot. And what you don't want to do is have to be deciding when the ball is in your hands what to do with it. You want to have already know what you're doing as you're picking it up to throw. But that's wisdom. Knowing what the right thing to do in the right moment is taking the collected knowledge and applying it in hypotheticals that you think are gonna lead you to the right outcomes. A person who always makes the bad decision and who makes a decision that ends in a bad outcome, that is not a person that we would call that would have wisdom. A person who makes good decisions, who when put into a question that what they say we ought to do usually ends up for the good, it's a person with wisdom. So I think that's the difference. What's Bina? I don't know. We'll come back to it. All right.
Doesn't luck also?
Of course, right? I'm sitting there left field, the ball's hit to me, it's a one hopper, there's one out and there's a guy on second. I know that I gotta catch that ball and as fast as I can, get it into the hands of my cutoff man, who's gonna see whether or not we're gonna throw the runner on second out at home or let the runner score and just keep the batter on first. Well, but if when the ball hits the ground, it hits a rock and shoots that way, bad luck.
But didn't the coach you to know, to think ahead?
That's what you do in practice.
Because I would never think.
No, the coach imparts wisdom onto the players. This is the proper thing to do, and that's what you do in practice, right? In baseball practice, when I was a kid, we would be on the field, the coach would be in play, all right, guys, one run out, runner on second. And the coach would hit the ball, and then we'd have to perform, and he would tell us, okay, you did the right thing, you should, whatever it is, but you drill those ideas, and that's how you gain wisdom. All right.
Do you learn wisdom? Is it experience?
It's learned, but it's not knowledge. It's this applied knowledge that if you have to internalize it through practice and repetition and internalization, which is what you want to do in practice, so that you're not in left field, the ball hits my glove and I go, oh crap, now what do I do?
Right.
Right? Because that half a second is the difference between a runner being safe and a runner being out. What's that?
I don't think that's
It's
wisdom.
baseball wisdom. It's baseball. No, we're in the closed set of baseball wisdom,
Okay.
right?
But it encompasses understanding. and
It does. I think wisdom is the highest applied, the highest level of application, right? Another example, right? So, I feel like one of the things that rabbis are asked to be really, really good at, that other folks are not so good at, is knowing what to say when poop hits the fan for people, right? Right? We know how to walk into a house that's just had a terrible loss and bring some modicum of whatever they need. It may or may not be comfort because they're not ready for it yet, but some kind of calm, some kind of something. We are expected not to lose our heads in those moments. I would call that a sense of type of wisdom.
And I don't think you can learn that. I think you have to feel it as well.
I think it's a bit of both. I think you have to be, you have to, I'll tell you, Bobby, that some of us are better wired for it than others.
Yeah.
But it's also learned from experience, right? When you're in school and you go and you learn from other rabbis how they behave, and you see how they behave, and then you figure out an authentic way to do it yourself. Some of it is knowledge, right? So when that family has a terrible loss, and at some point they're going to say to me, Rabbi, what do we do? And I know the answer to that question. I know what questions they need to ask themselves and answer to talk about, okay, we need to have a funeral, and all those practical things, right? Oftentimes I'm asked those questions long in advance of someone's passing, and that's the easy way to do it. But I have sat in this building with families who they all woke up alive and someone died that day unexpectedly. And after taking a little bit of time to just let out the shry, it was the rabbi's job to say, all right, I know this is really, really hard, but you got to make a couple of decisions. You have to make them now. And these are your choices. And then to hold their hand as they make those decisions. That's applying knowledge that anyone can have, but in a way that's effective.
This is a complicated question. What about those people that have more of a spiritual connection to God and have more of a sense of intuitiveness, a knowing, a sense of surety? What place does that individual have?
So it's interesting. I was with you said a place of surety, because I think that for some people, for a lot of people who have wisdom, it is divinely given in a certain way. Some people are born with it and some people are not, right? There's that one piece to it. That sense of, I feel connected to God, and that gives me a place of surety. Well, that's a double-edged sword. But amplifies the applicability and how it's received by the other person. But we all know people who claim to be close to God and who are bonkers. So I think I think that is a spectrum on a different axis.
Okay.
All right, I want to move forward. We're going to move now into the Musar world. Rabbi Luzzatto, Amsterdam, 18th century, in his collection Mesilat Yesharim, the Book of the Just, one of the foundational texts of the Musar tradition, which turns this the other way. The trait of anava, of humility. He says, another of the detriments of humility is associating with or being served by flatterers. Praise and exalt him by exaggerating to the extreme whatever virtues he possesses, and by adding to this virtues he does not at all possess. Sometimes what he does not possess is the very opposite of what they praise him for. Thinking about our example of people being set in positions of decision-making authority and judgments, where might these risks, where might they apply? Politics, Spencer?
If you let people be part of your decision-making process,
Yeah,
just say nice things to you, it's not always the best. I mean, Truman said that, so.
right. So one possible is that the decision makers bring in sycophants, and then their decision making is not as wisdomous as it should. That's not a real word, by the way. It's not as good. So that's one possibility. Who else is at risk of flattery?
Well, I experienced it at work,
Okay.
where I was convinced that somebody did not, and it was after I took a Roussard class.
Mhm.
I was convinced that this woman
Who's at risk of trafficking in flattery? Certainly the judges themselves, right? If you get chosen to be one of these chiefs, you're at risk of falling victim to feeling flattered, right? Look how important I am. God chose me to be the head of my block. Look how important I am. God chose me to be the head of 100 or 1,000, right? And then they're at risk of being flattered by those around them because they already think how special they are. And when people want something from them, oh, Your Honor, such a lovely blouse. Your Honor, you look good. You've been working out, right? This risk of flattery is there. And, by the way, the other way around. If you're supposed to be impartial, you should not be demonstrating any flattery to either one of the litigants. There was an episode a few years ago, I forget where the referee at an international soccer match was found to have been asking for autographs from some of the global star players after the match. Does it really matter?
No.
Probably not. It's just not appropriate, right? Professional athletes and referees are co-workers. They work together. They have a relationship. They know each other. Some of them are even on a first name basis. But you cannot fraternize. You cannot suggest that you have any relationship closer to any one of the players than anybody else. And as an official, right, who's meant to be impartial, if you're asking a player for an autograph, it's completely inappropriate. Just like if you're a judge, right? Who remembers Judge Ito? Lance Ito.
Yes.
Who's Judge Ito? It's not, I can't imagine it's easy to be a judge in a trial where one of the litigants is a high profile celebrity. You can almost do no right. Because if you are too mean to him, you're treating him badly because he's a celebrity. And if you're too nice to him, you're treating him too nice because he's a celebrity.
Someone's gonna accuse you of either one, no matter what.
Exactly. Exactly. It's not easy. Interpretation. The word wisdom, chokhmah, actually connotes both knowledge and intellect, da'at and bina. Right? It's this idea that if you add knowledge and discernment together, that leads to, or that is an example of, that's wisdom. The meaning of that is written in Daniel. He who gives wisdom to the intelligent. Wisdom is imparted by God to one who possesses intelligence and not to one lacking this trait, and thus unable to conceptualize his knowledge. You can know a lot of things, not know how to apply. Don't often have that much knowledge. Can there be a wise 5-year-old?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah. Solomon wrote that a prerequisite for developing this intelligence is to acquire knowledge and tradition, and afterwards try to understand. For thus did the sages of blessed memory caution: a person should learn first and then attempt to interpret. The latter meaning to understand the rationale for the laws that one has learned. Something that I read when I was in school getting my master's in education talked about one of the things that we too often in Torah study is we put a text and we say, all right, what does this mean? Right? And we immediately begin interpreting what this text says. And just making sure that we understand what the text says of and in itself. What does the text say? The second set of questions are to say, okay, what do we think the author of this text was trying to tell us in the moment that the text was given? How does this text that we just now know for sure we understand what it says, how does it apply it to the world in which it came out of? And then the third question we can ask is, and how does it apply to us in our lives today? But you can't skip over the first two, because you're going to miss pieces. Interesting. Moving back to Rashi, where he's going to talk about how these judges who have been chosen for their wisdomness are supposed to behave. I said to them, be deliberate in judgment. If a certain point of law comes before you once, twice, 3 times, do not say, this point of law has already come before me several times, but discuss it well on that occasion also. Spencer.
So how there are opinions that are turned and overturned in the US system, left and right, who can relitigate 17 things.
Right. Without making commentary on the prudence of those changes, the point is that as a judge, you shouldn't look at a case at first glance and say, we've already discussed this, we know what the answer is. Right? Because every case has its nuance. Every case deserves its own day in the sun. Perhaps another look will just reinforce the prevailing wisdom and the judgment. Great. Or perhaps it suggests a nuance that was never considered before. Right? It was all well and good when Moses was portioning out the land of Israel through the heads of households to all of the families in Israel. And of all the families, there wasn't a single complaint. Right? First it goes to the tribe, then to the head of the thousands, then to the head of the hundreds, then the head of the 50, and then to the head of each household. All is well and good, yeah? Until what?
It wasn't a man.
Until there was one family out of the entire nation that had no man. And so the women, the daughters of Zelophehad, were prevented from getting their father's share because there was no man to claim it for.
Until they spoke up.
Until they spoke up. And a new nuance presented itself. Spencer.
So this is saying every case needs to be looked at because we might have missed something.
Yeah.
Judges are human.
Not even that we missed something, maybe just there's a new example here. This is a scenario that has never happened before. That can happen. And so even if the fact patterns look the same, you have to make sure that this is actually the same. All right. Siftei Chachamim, a super commentary, a commentary on Rashi from the 1600s, Shabtai ben Yosef Bass wrote, it is written, I commended your judges, but there has not been any previous mention of judges. It should have said leaders. Judges is intended for an exegesis. Judges is screaming, Darshani, Darshani, interpret me, because why do we have judges, right? Remember, the why is because it's a different author than the book of Exodus.
What is exegesis?
Biblical what we do here, taking apart the biblical text and understanding it. That's what that means. Taking out of the text. The verse should be interpreted as, I command you regarding matters of judgment to act with patience. However, the Re'im explains it is derived from between your brothers, which is at the end of the verse. It would have been sufficient to say, and you are to judge right between a man and his complainant. Rather, between your brothers is intended to teach us to act with patience in judging, to listen between your brothers and understand their statements well, So that if certain litigation is brought before you, et cetera, right? That this is a little bit about what the attitude of the judge should be. The attitude of the judge should be that both the litigants are common, right? They're kin. They are equal. They have their own personal relationship that should be fostered. They should treat each other with respect. You should treat them with respect, right? Ideally, litigants in a trial should end the trial with a solid emotional connection in a relationship, irrespective of the outcome of the case. That's ideally. I've never been sued, God willing, I never will be sued, but I would imagine most lawsuits don't end with the parties going out for ice cream afterwards. Unless we're talking about mock trial.
The lawyers are coworkers, wouldn't there be a possibility they get along?
For sure, but they're not the litigants, right? There actually probably is a high likelihood. Now, you talk to litigators, they would say, you talk to a plaintiff's attorney, a defense attorney, they will say, I have plenty of friends across the aisle. And I have a couple of folks I'd rather not see in the courtroom, not because they're good, but because they're not, right? They're not easy to work with, right? They're tough, right? They're not friendly, right? Some of the best legal TV shows in my mind are the ones where you see the different types of attorneys fraternizing together after work, right? Because they're just people, right? By the way, not for nothing, I'm pretty friendly with most of the rabbis in town, right? Even though our congregations may see things differently, either because we're different movements or because we're both the same movements, right? But the rabbis at B'nai Israel, the rabbis at B'nai Torah, the rabbis at Sha'arei Kodesh, the rabbis at Boca Raton Synagogue, the rabbis at Chabad, I see them on the street, and I do. Big smile and a hi, how are you? Perhaps a handshake or a hug. That's who we are. That's who we are. That's how it's supposed to be. Now we're going to get into a really meaty piece. Or Chaim. Rabbi Chaim ben Moshe ben Itar, Moroccan Kabbalist, 18th century. The word lemor, God said to Moses, saying lemor, is, as in many instances, indicates that the words to be communicated were not intended to be literally these words and immediate, right? But just the general sense. In this instance, Moses didn't command the judges to say specific things. He informed them that as an essential part of the judicial process was to listen to the arguments of a litigant only when the opposing side was present, right? This idea that we see in the text, I'll show it in the text. Hear out your fellow Israelites and decide between one part and the other. You will not be part of it. They both need to be there. For it to be fair, they both need to be there, right? This, by the way, is a piece of how law is practiced in our country, right? There should be no ex parte conversations. To discuss matters of the case before the judge, both parties have to be present. Whether it's in open court or in chambers or anywhere else. Perhaps Moses also wanted to hint at something we learned in Talmud Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, that we are told that when Rav Huna watched litigation and observed that one of the defendants did not argue a point in his favor, which he could have argued out of ignorance, he interfered the proceedings and drew the defendant's attention to an argument he should use. That's interesting. The judge intervening on behalf of one of the parties, that seems a little bit odd. He based himself on Proverbs 31, open your mouth, speak righteously. That's, by the way, Proverbs 31, that's Eshet Chaya, woman of valor. She opens her mouth to wisdom, and the words of kindness are on her tongue. This is precisely what Moses may have alluded to when he said, Lemor, no steps must be neglected if they help to establish true and fair judgment. Now, I see your hand, Lauren. Let me say something first. There are different types of legal systems. In America, we have what is called the adversarial legal system, meaning there are always three sides to the case. You have the plaintiff, you have the defendant, and you have the judge. And they are each on their own team. And the two sides are working against each other, and whatever outcome comes is quote unquote the right one. In other countries, they do not have an adversarial system. In other countries, you have the judge and the prosecutor and the defendant lawyer, kind of all working together to get the truth. That while the defendant has a lawyer, that lawyer is not independent from the process in the same way. This looks to be a little bit more like that. That there is in certain ways a partnership among the litigators and the judge to get to a desired outcome, true and fair as it may be. Whereas in our country, there's no working together. You win, you lose, you lose. And especially in criminal cases, the deck is stacked against the prosecution. I think it was Judge Holmes who once said he'd rather have 100 guilty people go free than one innocent person go to jail. And so that's not equal. That's not true and fair judgment. It's a different expectation. Lauren, you were just like,
I think I just need to read it again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. He continues. Moses also wanted to warn the judges to be astute enough to detect from between the lines of what the litigants had to say as to whether they were speaking truthfully. It is true that the verdict must be based on what the litigants said and not what they did or how they said it. If it became clear during their testimony and from their demeanor the truth appeared to be the reverse of what they said, then Moses instructed the judges, Shmoa bein acheichem, listen to what the difference was between the brothers, between the litigants, and what was obviously a distortion. This enabled them to arrive at a fair verdict, ushaftem tzedek, to make judgments righteously. What appears to the judges to be the true state of affairs. Remember, there were no juries. The judges were the jury. On occasion, such judgment may appear to contradict what is written in the law books. A judge cannot rule fairly except if the verdict is in line with his perception of the truth. The word shamoa addresses itself not merely to the ears of the judge, but also to his brain. Listen with your ears and with your brain. Maddie.
What was the state of the edicts or the laws of the time? Because we have,
Whose time? Or Chaim's?
well, the time that they're commenting on.
Which day? The Torah or Chaim?
I would say in general, the Torah.
But you can't because
Well,
the
God,
Torah is talking about the
God.
Torah is talking about, well, no, talking about God has chosen the judges, but we're talking. Only 250 years ago, right? We're talking about thousands of years of time difference between when Torah was written and Or Chaim is talking. Now, Or Chaim is projecting back as to how they behaved during Torah, but also because this is how we should behave now. Oh, and by the way, most of these rabbinic commentators were not living in a world where we had any authority to do any of this because we were living as a minority. So we weren't even responsible for the pursuit of justice in our own communities. Only in very small, unique cases of intra-Jewish, mostly civil disagreement. Right? But today,
There are a lot of Jews on the bench.
there are, but they don't use Jewish law,
I know.
right? And if someone thinks that I stole something from you in this room, who are you gonna go to?
Rabbi Dan probably,
Maybe, but who's gonna be able to get it back from me?
the cops.
The Boca PD, right? The civil authorities. And that's the life of most Jews throughout most of this time. Yeah. Spencer.
Oh.
Spencer.
No, it's okay. You answered
Okay.
In this time, did the judge have the ability to overrule the attorneys in what was fair and just?
Of course. The judge made the decision, yeah.
The judge made.
Right. Right. Hypothetically, because there were no judges empowered to do this in this time, but yes, hypothetically. Yeah, Alan.
So there wasn't like an appeal process back then?
Well, there may have been more judges to go to, but the idea is that you had multiple judges, they would hear the case, they make a decision, so be it. Okay. Akedah Yitzchak, Spanish Rabbi Isaac ben Moses, 15th century. He lived right before the expulsion and the Inquisition. God has entrusted the administration of justice on earth to human judges. If these judges fail to perform fairly, they are in turn subjected to God's judgment. Faulty judgments are due to any of four causes, all of which Yitro addressed to himself in offering his advice to Moses. A judge may have had a bad character, loved violence, his judgments were apt to be corrupt. How long will you pronounce corrupt judgments, the psalm asks. A judge may be God-fearing, willing to judge truthfully, but when it comes to minor matters involving small sums, he may not be so diligently. I'm tired. This case is not important. I'm not going to try as hard. Right? This is why we're told in Psalms to judge the poor and the orphan. People who are the ones to come to small claims courts. Why do poor and orphans only end up in small claims courts?
Not enough money.
They don't have big claims, exactly. They don't even have exact ask for. A judge must be as careful with a penny as with a million. Even though the judge is God-fearing and may consider small sums as carefully as large ones, he may be swayed by considerations of personal gain or honor. He may fear a particular litigant involved in a lawsuit before him. Concerning such a situation, the psalmist says, rescue the defenseless and save them from the lawless. The judge may err in his application of the logic, or due to the ignorance of the point of law in question. Concerning this, the psalmist says, they do not know or understand, they walk in darkness. Yitro incorporates warnings against the four shortcomings listed in his advice. Concerning the judge's character, he recommends the selection of God's fearing individuals. Concerning the judge's inclination to downgrade the attention to litigation and more sentences, says, call for men who hate unjust gain. Concerning the judge's professional knowledge, she says that all difficult or major matters, Alan, to your question, they get bumped up to Moses. Moses was the appellate court. And when Moses carries out his suggestions, he acts in accordance with these principles. When he instructs them to don't recognize faces and show favoritism, listen to the big and to the small, do not be scared, and anything which is too difficult, pass to me. Which is why there were 78,600 judges to bring the minimization of all this. But ultimately, how many judges do we need?
Just enough to get through all of them.
Just one. Hashem, the Lord God self. That's why these sacrifices are set up an inferior method of achieving atonement, since conduct based on justice and righteousness achieves results under any set of circumstances. Most of us are not legal judges. All of us judge other people every day, which is what I want us to take away from this. Don't judge the poor against the rich, or the rich against the poor, or the sightly against the unsightly. Listen not just with your ears, with your brains, and follow this pursuit of justice in the way that we live our lives as well. As we hear in the prophet Micah, walk humbly and pursue justice. Shabbat shalom.